The morning light slipped through the lace curtains of Maple and Main Café, a small-town diner that had stood on the corner for nearly 40 years. The smell of roasted beans and buttered biscuits wrapped itself around the room like a familiar blanket. It wasn't a place where anything dramatic usually happened. The café was a sanctuary, steady, predictable, a quiet pause in a noisy world. In the very back booth, tucked against the window, sat Evelyn Carter. To most who saw her, she was simply an elderly black woman with a kind smile and a calm presence. She never demanded attention, never made a fuss. Every morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, she walked in, greeted the waitress by name, ordered her plain black coffee with 1 spoon of sugar, and sat in the same seat. The booth was her corner of peace. Evelyn wore her Sunday best even on weekdays. A pressed blouse, a neatly pinned brooch, and a small silver cross that hung gently at her neck. Her hands, worn from years of labor and love, wrapped around the warm mug as though drawing strength from it. Those who paid attention could see the faint scars along her fingers, reminders of decades of cooking, scrubbing, and raising children in a world that often gave her little in return. But Evelyn wasn't bitter. She carried herself with quiet dignity, as though life's hardships had taught her something deeper than anger. She spoke gently to the waitress, who was a young single mother struggling to make rent. She tipped well, even though she lived on a modest pension. And when she wasn't reading her tattered Bible, she simply watched people pass through the café's doors, nodding and smiling like an old friend. The regulars knew her, though few truly knew her. To them, she was just a kind presence, like the grandfather clock that chimed every hour or the jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Evelyn had been there so long she had become part of the café itself. But what no one realized, what no one even thought to ask, was that Evelyn Carter was more than just a quiet woman in the corner booth. She had lived through storms no one could imagine. She had buried a husband too young, raised children through poverty and prejudice, and somehow managed to send her eldest son through law school. That son had risen through the ranks until he became the most powerful man in the county. Yet Evelyn never bragged. She never told strangers who her son was. She preferred her silence, her coffee, and her morning peace. To her, titles and power were things for the world outside. Inside the café, she was simply Evelyn, the woman with kind eyes, soft words, and a resilience that had been mistaken, too often, for weakness. That morning, as she stirred her coffee and watched the sunlight catch the dust motes in the air, Evelyn thought of nothing more than the errands she had to run after breakfast. It felt like any other day. But within the next 38 seconds, everything about this peaceful little café, and the woman sitting quietly in her booth, would be changed forever. The sound of the café doorbell was usually a welcome one, neighbors greeting neighbors, a child running in for a sweet roll, or an old friend stopping by to chat. But on that particular morning, when the bell chimed and the door swung open, the entire atmosphere shifted. Deputy Travis Hale stepped inside. He was impossible to ignore. Tall, broad-shouldered, built like he wanted the world to know he was in charge. His uniform was pressed sharp, his badge polished until it gleamed, but his mirrored sunglasses and swagger told the truth. This wasn't a man who served with humility. This was a man who took pleasure in reminding others of his authority. Conversations in the café faltered. A fork clinked against a plate, then silence. The waitress's cheerful voice dropped mid-sentence. Even the cook peered out from the kitchen window, his spatula paused midair. Everyone in town knew Travis. He had a reputation, a hot temper, a sharp tongue, and an ugly streak of superiority. He wasn't just strict, he was cruel. He pulled people over not for safety but for sport, for the smug grin that came when he made someone squirm. In particular, he had an eye for intimidation. And he often chose targets who couldn't, or wouldn't, fight back. Evelyn Carter kept her eyes lowered to her coffee. She didn't want trouble. She never wanted trouble. But the moment Travis's boots hit the linoleum floor, she felt it, the shift in the air, like a storm building on the horizon. He scanned the room slowly, his gaze sweeping past the counter, the stools, the half-filled tables. Then his eyes landed on the back booth. On Evelyn. That booth wasn't his. Not officially. Not written anywhere. But Travis had claimed it weeks ago, the same way a dog claims a patch of grass. He'd sat there a few times, and that was enough. Now, in his mind, it belonged to him. And seeing someone else, especially Evelyn, sitting there made his lip curl. He started toward her, boots thudding louder with each step. People lowered their eyes, pretending not to watch, though every glance darted back to the unfolding scene. Nobody dared intervene. Not with Travis. When he stopped at Evelyn's table, his shadow stretched across her coffee cup. She looked up, offering her faint, polite smile. "Good morning, officer," she said softly. He didn't smile back. Instead, he placed one gloved hand on the edge of her table and leaned down, his presence filling the booth like a dark cloud. "That's my seat," he said flatly. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that demanded obedience. The café grew still. You could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the slow tick of the old clock, the shallow breaths of customers who didn't dare exhale too loudly. Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but her grip on the coffee cup tightened ever so slightly. She had faced men like Travis before, men who mistook arrogance for authority, cruelty for strength. She knew his type. But she also knew something he didn't. Travis Hale thought he was about to remind Evelyn of her place. What he couldn't see, what he would never imagine, was that this quiet woman, sitting calmly in her booth, had raised someone far more powerful than him. And the moment he tried to break her dignity, he would set into motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. Deputy Travis Hale didn't move away from the table. His shadow loomed over Evelyn's booth like a thundercloud, thick and oppressive. His gloved fingers tapped against the worn tabletop, each thunk-thunk-thunk echoing like a countdown. "I said," he repeated, voice low but sharp enough to cut glass, "that's my seat." Evelyn looked up, her gentle brown eyes steady. She didn't tremble, didn't bow her head like so many others had in Travis's presence. Instead, she offered a soft, polite tone, the same tone she used with anyone else. "I'm comfortable here, officer," she said, folding her napkin neatly in her lap. "I'll be done in a little while. You're welcome to wait." The words were not confrontational. They weren't shouted. But they carried something Travis didn't expect: firmness. Boundaries. The quiet resistance of someone who refused to be shoved aside. For a moment, silence held the cafe hostage. The waitress froze mid-step, balancing a tray of pancakes. A man at the counter lowered his newspaper, eyes darting between Evelyn and the deputy. The old clock on the wall ticked louder and louder, as though marking time until something snapped. Travis's jaw tightened. He leaned closer, close enough for Evelyn to smell the faint sting of aftershave and stale coffee on his breath. "You don't seem to understand," he said, his tone dripping with venom. "This is my seat. When I say move, you move. That's how this works." Evelyn stirred her coffee slowly, her hand steady despite the storm gathering around her. "With respect, officer," she replied softly, "I've sat here every morning for years. It's just a chair. Surely there are others." Her refusal wasn't loud. It wasn't bold. But in the stillness of that cafe, it might as well have been a gunshot. Travis straightened, his fists curling at his sides. Nobody told him no. Especially not someone like her. He scanned the room, eyes darting to the witnesses. Every pair of eyes quickly looked away. Nobody would stand with her. Nobody ever did. That thought fueled his rage. He slammed his hand against the table, rattling the silverware and making the waitress flinch so hard she nearly dropped her tray. The cafe seemed to shrink, the air tightening like a rope pulled too taut. "You think you're special?" he hissed. "You think you get to disrespect me in front of everyone? No, ma'am. That's not how this works in my town." Evelyn's heart beat faster, but her face remained calm. She took a small sip of coffee, the steam curling around her lips. Then she looked him dead in the eye and whispered, almost too softly to hear, "This town doesn't belong to you, officer. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of decades of endurance, of battles fought in silence. For Travis, it was the final straw. His face flushed red, his chest heaving as if the very idea of defiance from her was unbearable. And in that moment, the cafe knew something terrible was about to happen. The air inside the cafe grew thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Travis's nostrils flared as Evelyn's quiet defiance rang in his ears. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't cursed, hadn't moved, but her refusal felt like a slap across his pride. The deputy's eyes narrowed. His hand twitched at his belt, brushing the holster where his badge and gun gleamed. For a split second, the whole cafe seemed to hold its breath, wondering if he would go too far. Evelyn sat still, shoulders back, her hands folded neatly on the table. She didn't challenge him. She didn't rise. That was the part that burned him most. She was unshaken, and it made him feel small. And Travis Hale couldn't stand feeling small. In a sudden, sharp motion, he reached across the table and snatched up her coffee cup. The porcelain scraped against the saucer, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. Every head in the cafe turned. The waitress froze mid-step, her tray trembling. The boy at the counter gasped. An older man muttered, "Dear God," under his breath. Evelyn's eyes flicked up, calm but wary. "Officer, please." Before she could finish, Travis tilted the cup forward and poured the scalding coffee directly onto her chest. The liquid splashed across her pressed blouse, searing into her skin. Evelyn gasped sharply, clutching at her chest as the fabric clung hot and wet to her. Her silver cross swung wildly as she jerked back, her body recoiling from the sudden burn. The cup clattered back onto the table, rolling in a small circle before toppling to the floor. A hush fell so heavy it seemed to choke the room. Travis straightened, lips curling into a cruel smirk. "Next time," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you'll remember your place." Evelyn's hands shook as she dabbed at her blouse with a napkin, her fingers trembling against the angry red marks already blooming on her chest. But her face remained composed. No tears. No screams. Only quiet dignity, even as her skin burned beneath the wet fabric. The cafe was frozen in shock. The waitress pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The cook gripped the edge of the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. Customers shifted uncomfortably, torn between fear and outrage. Nobody dared step forward. For a long, awful moment, the only sound was Evelyn's shallow breathing and the slow drip, drip, drip of coffee sliding off the table onto the floor. Travis turned, puffing out his chest, reveling in the silence he commanded. To him, this was victory, a demonstration of power, a reminder of who controlled the town. But what he didn't realize was that in those few cruel seconds, he hadn't proven his strength. He had revealed his weakness. And across the cafe, in the eyes of every witness, a seed of reckoning was planted. Evelyn Carter didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat there, her dignity intact, as though daring the world to remember what had just happened. And someone very important, would. The cafe felt like a photograph, frozen, suspended, every face locked in disbelief. For a long moment after the coffee hit Evelyn's chest, not a single soul moved. The only sound was the slow dripping of liquid from the edge of her table onto the linoleum floor. The waitress, a young woman named Clara, stood paralyzed with a tray balanced in her shaking hands. The pancakes she carried slid to the side, threatening to topple. Her eyes were wide with horror, her lips pressed tight to hold back the scream she wanted to release. She wanted to rush forward, to help Evelyn blot the burns, to say something, anything. But fear gripped her throat. Travis Hale was a deputy. Deputies didn't answer to waitresses. At the counter, a retired factory worker named Earl clenched his fists until his knuckles cracked. His paper lay forgotten on the counter, his half-eaten eggs going cold. Earl had lived in this town his whole life, and he had seen cruelty before. But this? This was different. This was public, deliberate, and carried out with smug confidence. His chest burned with the shame of his own silence. A boy no older than 12 sat with his father near the window, his milkshake straw frozen halfway to his lips. He looked at Evelyn, her trembling hands, her blouse stained and steaming, and something in him shifted. Childhood innocence fractured, replaced with a sharp understanding. Sometimes the people in uniforms weren't the heroes you thought they were. Even the cook, heavy-set and red-faced, poked his head from the kitchen window. He held his spatula like a weapon, jaw tight. For half a second, it looked as though he might burst through the swinging door and confront Travis head-on. But his eyes darted to the badge on Travis's chest, then to the holstered weapon at his side. The spatula lowered. His courage retreated. The silence was suffocating. Everyone wanted to do something, but the weight of authority pressed them into stillness. Travis smirked, misreading the silence as submission, as proof of his untouchable power. Evelyn, dabbing at her blouse with napkins, felt the weight of those stares. She wasn't angry at their inaction. She understood fear. She had lived with it for years. But she also knew something none of them did, that this moment wouldn't pass quietly. Not this time. Across the café, people exchanged glances. Unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Did you see that? Did he really do that? They didn't know it yet, but every single person in that room had just become a witness. Their silence might have protected them in the moment, but it would also bind them to the truth when the reckoning came. Travis adjusted his belt, puffing up his chest like he'd won something. "That's how it works," he muttered, striding toward the door. His boots stomped across the tile, the jingle of the cafe bell marking his exit. But his arrogance blinded him. He thought he had silenced the room. In reality, he had filled it with voices that would soon rise, one by one, against him. And though Evelyn sat quietly, pressing her napkin to her burned skin, there was no mistaking the look in her eyes. The cafe had returned to an uneasy quiet after Travis Hale's heavy boots thundered out the door. The bell above the entrance jingled as it closed, but the sound did little to settle the tension. People shifted in their seats, whispering in low tones, afraid even in the deputy's absence. Evelyn Carter sat still, napkin pressed gently against her blouse, her eyes fixed on the table. Her blouse was stained dark, and faint red patches burned across her chest where the coffee had scalded her. She said nothing, though Clara the waitress hovered nearby, whispering, "Do you want me to call someone? A doctor?" "Evelyn, please." Evelyn only shook her head. "No, child. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Everyone knew it. And the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Then the doorbell jingled again. The sound made everyone glance up, expecting another customer, or worse, the deputy returning for more. But instead, the man who stepped through the door carried a presence entirely different. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a dark suit that seemed out of place in a small-town diner. His shoes clicked sharply against the tile as he entered, his polished appearance in stark contrast to the quiet rustic cafe. His very presence shifted the atmosphere, demanding attention without a word. It was Marcus Carter, Evelyn's eldest son. Marcus had inherited his mother's steady eyes, though his carried a weight honed by years of battles in courtrooms and back rooms where power was brokered. He wasn't just respected in town, he was feared by those who bent the rules and revered by those who needed justice. As district attorney, he had dismantled corrupt networks, sent career criminals to prison, and forced the sheriff's department to answer for things they'd rather bury. But in this moment, Marcus wasn't a DA. He was a son. The moment his eyes fell on his mother, seated with trembling hands and a stained blouse, his stride faltered. His jaw tightened. He crossed the cafe in 3 quick steps, his hand reaching gently for hers. "Mom," he whispered, crouching beside her booth. His voice softened in a way it never did in court. "What happened?" Evelyn tried to smile, though her lips quivered. "It's nothing, Marcus." "Don't." He cut her off, his gaze scanning the room, sharp and demanding. The witnesses lowered their eyes, uncomfortable under the weight of his stare. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice trembling. It was Deputy Hale," she whispered. He poured her coffee on her. Right in front of us. We all saw it." Marcus's face stilled, the calm before a storm. His eyes darkened, his jaw set like stone. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't need to. Because everyone in that cafe recognized the look on his face. It was the look of a man who had just witnessed his mother's humiliation, and who carried both the power and the will to answer it. For Travis Hale, the game had just changed. Marcus Carter crouched beside his mother, gently lifting her trembling hands away from her chest. The napkin she'd been pressing against her blouse was soaked and useless, and beneath it, angry red marks blistered across her skin. His breath caught in his throat. "Mom," his voice cracked, soft enough that only she could hear. "He did this?" Evelyn tried to steady her expression, but her lips quivered. "Marcus, don't make trouble. It's just coffee. It'll heal." But Marcus wasn't looking at her burns anymore. He was looking at her eyes. And in those deep, tired eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen since childhood, the flicker of humiliation. Evelyn Carter, the strongest woman he knew, the woman who had survived every storm life hurled her way, had been reduced to this, by a man who wore a badge. His chest tightened, rage pressing against his ribs like a rising tide. He clenched his fists, but forced himself to breathe. Anger, untempered, was a weapon that cut both ways. His mother had taught him that. Across the cafe, the silence thickened. The witnesses watched Marcus, recognizing the storm gathering in his eyes. They'd seen his name in the papers, watched him on television during trials, heard stories about how he dismantled criminal cases piece by piece until even hardened men begged for mercy. But here, now, he wasn't the district attorney. He was a son watching his mother suffer. And that made him even more dangerous. Clara, the waitress, tried to whisper comfort. "She didn't do anything, Mr. Carter. She just wouldn't give up her seat." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, the words searing into his memory. Wouldn't give up her seat. Simple words, yet they carried the weight of history, decades of defiance, silent strength, dignity that refused to bow. His mother had carried that weight her whole life, never asking for protection. But today, Travis Hale had crossed the line. Marcus leaned closer to Evelyn. His voice was low, calm, but every syllable trembled with contained fury. "You don't have to say another word, Mom. I saw enough. And I promise you, he won't touch you, or anyone else, ever again." Evelyn shook her head, tears finally threatening to spill. "Marcus, please, don't lose yourself to anger." "I'm not angry," Marcus said, though the lie was evident in the steel of his jaw. "I'm focused." And that's worse for him. When Marcus stood, the room seemed to shift with him. He wasn't just rising from his mother's side, he was stepping into a different role. His posture straightened, his eyes sharpened, his voice carried authority that silenced even the whispers. "Every one of you," he said, sweeping the room with his gaze. "You saw what happened. Don't be afraid to speak. Justice will protect you." Heads nodded. Hesitant at first, but then stronger. For the first time, the witnesses felt something new, relief. Someone was finally standing up to Travis Hale. Marcus turned toward the door, his fists clenched but his mind sharpened like a blade. Deputy Hale thought he had humiliated a quiet woman. What he had really done was awaken her son. Marcus Carter's polished shoes clicked against the cracked pavement as he left the cafe, his mother's quiet dignity and pain burning in his chest like a fire he could not extinguish. He didn't storm out. He didn't slam the door. Marcus never needed theatrics. His silence carried more weight than thunder. The midday sun glared down, bouncing off the row of sheriff's cruisers parked crookedly near the station across the street. And leaning against one of them, smug as ever, was Deputy Travis Hale. A cigarette dangled from his lips, his arms crossed, posture loose in the way only a man drunk on his own power could stand. He spotted Marcus instantly. A smirk spread across his face. Well, well, if it isn't the city's golden boy. Come to scold me, counselor? His voice was dripping with mockery. Or maybe you want my seat too? Marcus didn't break stride. He approached slowly, his eyes never leaving Hale's. Each step was measured, precise, like a predator closing the distance to its prey. He stopped only when the space between them was close enough that Hale could feel the heat of his calm, controlled fury. "Deputy," Marcus said evenly. "You humiliated my mother." Hale chuckled, flicking ash from his cigarette. "Your mother? That old woman? She should have moved when I told her to. Rules are rules." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed level. "Rules? Or your ego? You didn't ask her to move, you tried to erase her dignity. And in doing so, you broke more than just morality. You broke the law." That word, law, shifted something. Hale straightened slightly, his smirk faltering. "Careful, Carter. You think wearing that DA badge makes you untouchable? This is my town." Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping low, a blade hidden in velvet. "Your town? No. This town belongs to the people. And every single one of them just watched you pour scalding coffee on a defenseless woman. My mother. You didn't just humiliate her, you exposed yourself. And I'm going to make sure your badge, your career, and your name are reduced to ash." Hale's nostrils flared. For a moment, the cocky deputy seemed to shrink under the weight of Marcus's words. But pride is a dangerous mask. He puffed his chest. "You think anyone here will testify against me? They're scared. They know who runs this place." Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile, cold and cutting. "They were scared. Until today. I gave them a reason to stop being silent. You'll be surprised how fast fear turns into fury when people realize they're not alone." Behind them, the cafe door creaked. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, defiance written across her face. Behind her, two more patrons stepped out, nodding silently toward Marcus. Witnesses. Supporters. The tide was shifting right before Hale's eyes. For the first time, the deputy looked uncertain. His cigarette trembled slightly in his fingers. Marcus leaned closer, his voice a whisper that carried more power than a shout. "You picked the wrong woman. And you picked the wrong son." The silence between them was electric, the kind that came before a storm. Hale swallowed hard, but Marcus was already turning away, heading back to his mother, leaving the deputy to feel the weight of a reckoning he could no longer escape. By nightfall, word of the cafe incident had already spread across town. In the grocery aisles, whispers flew. In church parking lots, murmurs rippled. By the time the courthouse clock struck 7, everyone knew Deputy Travis Hale had gone too far. Marcus sat at his desk, the dim glow of his office lamp casting long shadows on stacks of case files. But tonight, those weren't the cases he cared about. Tonight, the file in front of him bore a single name, Travis Hale. Marcus had written it in bold letters, underlined twice. Beneath it, he began a list: assault, abuse of authority, civil rights violation, witness intimidation. Each charge was more than words on a page, it was a piece of the news he was quietly weaving for Hale. The phone on his desk buzzed. Clara's voice cracked through the line. "Mr. Carter? It's me. We're ready. People are scared, but they want to speak. They want to help." Marcus's lips pressed into a thin smile. "Good. Tomorrow, we'll make their voices impossible to ignore." The next morning, the town square transformed into something it hadn't been in years, a gathering of the people. Ordinary citizens, once silent under the shadow of Hale and his cronies, now stood shoulder to shoulder. Some carried signs. Others carried nothing but their anger in their voices. And at the center stood Marcus, calm but unyielding, with Evelyn Carter seated quietly in the front row, her bandaged chest a silent testament to Hale's cruelty. Reporters had gathered, their cameras poised. The sheriff's office loomed nearby, blinds drawn tight. Everyone knew Hale was inside, watching. Marcus stepped onto the courthouse steps, his presence commanding the restless crowd into silence. He held up the file, the charges against Hale written clear as day. "Yesterday," he began, his voice echoing through the square, "a deputy of this town thought he was above the law. He thought power gave him the right to humiliate, to assault, to dehumanize. He was wrong." A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. Marcus continued, his tone sharpening with each word. "This isn't just about my mother. This is about every person who's ever been silenced. Every time someone was told to look the other way. Every time dignity was stolen under the weight of a badge misused. That ends now." He turned slightly, letting the cameras catch Evelyn's face, her quiet strength undeniable. "This woman raised me to believe in justice. And today, I intend to deliver it, not through anger, not through violence, but through the very law Deputy Hale swore to uphold." The crowd erupted, chants swelling, "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Inside the sheriff's office, blinds shifted. Hale's shadow appeared, pacing. For the first time, the deputy realized this wasn't a private battle, it was public. His name wasn't whispered in fear anymore. It was shouted in defiance. Marcus raised the file high. "Deputy Hale will answer for his actions. In this courthouse, under this law, with this community standing as witness. Silence has broken. And justice will not be delayed." The crowd roared. Reporters scribbled furiously. Evelyn bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from pain, but from pride. Justice wasn't just coming. It had already begun. The courtroom was packed. Every bench filled, every corner crammed with townspeople who, just weeks ago, would never have dared to stand against the sheriff's office. Now they gathered shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with anticipation. Reporters lined the back, cameras poised to capture every second. At the front, Deputy Travis Hale sat stiffly, his uniform pressed to perfection, his jaw tight. But the confidence he once wore like armor had cracked. His hands trembled faintly on the defense table. He wasn't feared anymore, he was cornered. And across from him, Evelyn Carter sat with quiet poise. Her posture was straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore no bitterness on her face, no fire in her eyes, just dignity. The bandage that had covered her chest was gone now, replaced by the scar of what he had done. But instead of shame, that scar radiated resilience. When the judge called the room to order, the air thickened. Marcus rose. He didn't need to raise his voice. His words carried with the weight of truth. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court," Marcus began, his gaze sweeping across the jurors, "this case is about power. A man entrusted with authority used that power to degrade, humiliate, and assault a woman who did nothing but sit quietly in her booth, sipping her coffee. He thought she was powerless. He thought no one would care. He was wrong." Hale's lawyers sputtered objections, but they fell flat against the mountain of testimony Marcus had built. One by one, witnesses took the stand: Clara, the waitress; Mr. Jenkins, the grocer; even two teenagers who had filmed the incident on their phones. The video played on a screen for all to see, Hale standing over Evelyn, sneering, before tipping scalding coffee onto her chest. The courtroom gasped. Evelyn didn't flinch as it replayed. She had lived it. She had survived it. When the final witness stepped down, Marcus walked slowly toward the jury. His voice lowered, softer now, but sharper than ever. "This is not just about my mother. It's about every person who has been silenced by fear. Every abuse that was buried because no one dared to speak. That silence ends today. If we allow this man to walk free, we tell the world that dignity can be bought, bullied, and burned. But if we hold him accountable, we tell the world something else, that justice is not a privilege. It is a promise." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the verdict rang like thunder through the tense air, guilty. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Not in triumph, but in peace. Hale was led away, his badge stripped from his chest. The town that once bowed to him now stared in silence, not with fear, but with relief. As the gavel struck, Marcus turned to his mother. She reached for his hand, her voice gentle but strong. "You didn't just fight for me," she whispered. "You fought for all of us." And in that moment, the café, the coffee, the humiliation, it all became something greater. Evelyn Carter, the quiet woman in the booth, was no longer a symbol of silence. She was proof of what happens when silence finally breaks.